Having been in the academy for more than 2 decades already, it is no doubt that storytelling is a very effective tool in teaching and in learning. In fact, storytelling has been regarded as the oldest form of teaching. How ancient, you might say, but this really makes students engage and collaborate. It encourages voluntary cooperation. And the most important thing is it eventually facilitates learning. But stories to be narrated must be related to the topic being discussed. Most studies, however, would affirm this technique to be effective mostly among those in the basic education only. But this is very effective too among adults. This is proven in business conferences and several fora that I have attended. Storytelling is a very powerful tool, especially when the speaker conveys a very good narrative. This is why in my next lesson in the graduate school, yes, you heard it right, my audience are not basic education students. They're not even in college. They are graduate students. I always integrate storytelling even in highly technical topics. So I would like to share what I'm going to tell my students taking up Masters in Public Administration this Saturday. Here it goes. These are actually gists of the stories of three grandmothers for the topic Philippine administration. I'll just be presenting an excerpt though. Here's the first one. In her photo, Jeng's grandmother was very proud to have finally experienced to cast her vote. 20 years after, she also witnessed lack of corruption in the Philippines. When she turned 45, she was favored by business group against Mr. Zemit, who is a foreigner. Now, here's the second story. Isaac's grandmother owns a vast of land and later on was required to allow tillers to lease her farmlands and eventually sold portions of these agricultural lands. And the last story is that of Mike's grandmother. Mike's grandmother, of course, it's a different story. She got a little bit dismayed because Mike just turned 18, but he is going to get married already. But Mike's father convinced her that she needs to accept it as the wedding date has been set and even murmured that she was 14 when she married her husband, who was then 16. Later on, Mike's grandmother became very, very happy that she still can mingle with her grandson's three children. So these are already the children of Mike. The other one is 12 years old, the other one is 16, and the other one is 19. Her great-grandson fully supported his wife in using contraceptives for their birth spacing. So what is the essence? How do these stories relate to public administration, which started as a discipline in the Philippines when the Institute of Public Administration was established in the University of the Philippines. This is now known as the UP National College of Public Administration and Governance. The stories actually are snippets of public administration because as a practice, let me just give a little background. It already evolved as early as the pre-colonial period. Though civilization was primitive at that time, there was already a system of government through the barangay as the basic political unit. There was no unifying political entity. Its barangay is an independent territory with one absolute ruler, the chieftain, or more popularly known as the datu, who actually exercised all the powers of the government. A massive reform was introduced when the Spaniards came. They introduced a highly centralized system of government, but this was filled with graft, corruption, and inefficiency. Well, that was taught in Philippine history. And then the Americans came. They gave the Philippines a modern administrative structure. Still centralized, but a lot of innovations were introduced until finally the civil service system had been manned already by the Filipinos. And the practice is being improved by different administrations. And then it evolves through time, so from one administration to another administration. So what presidents of a country, governors and mayors in the local level, what they implement affect people, positive and or negative, and these form part of public administration. This is so because public administration mirrors any activity and any processes of our government. Hence, the stories of grandmothers demonstrate real life situations that involve public administration. What happened, what is happening, and what will happen in the future is primarily a product of leadership and public administration. And of course, the process of governance. So, let's go back to the story of Jeng's grandmother. How is this related to public administration? During the administration of President Manuel Quezon, women's suffrage became a reality. Recalling history, the right to vote was limited to male citizens who must be 23 years old or over and are legal residents in the Philippines. This was mandated in Act 1582 in 1907. The 1935 Constitution as well also limited the right to suffrage of male citizens of the Philippines. Eventually, of course, there was a clamor. There were these groups of women who cried for equality and fought for their right to vote. So a provision was included in the 1935 Constitution to extend the right of suffrage to Filipino women, but this is on the condition that qualified female voters, who must not be less than 300,000, should vote affirmatively via a plebiscite. And so that's really a huge number. That was the figure needed to realize their right to suffrage. 300,000 affirmative votes. And they made it. It was a glorious victory as 447,725 women cast their votes in favor of women's suffrage on April 30, 1937. Jeng's grandmother was very lucky too, as she witnessed Philippines' golden years under President Ramon Magsaysay. As cited in most sources, there was lack of corruption in his administration. And then another highlight of the story of Jeng's grandmother is that she was favored too against a foreigner in a particular business bid. Well, this might be a bit exaggerated, but I just want to emphasize President Carlo P. Garcia's Filipino First policy at that time. For the next story, on the story of Isaac's grandmother, if you're going to trace back agrarian reforms in the country, it was during the time of President Diosdado Macapagal that Republic Act 3844 or the Agricultural Land Reform Code was enacted. This law abolished the shared tenancy system and replaced it with the leasehold system. This is why he was named the father of agrarian reform. So, I will integrate that in that story. To further elaborate the story, I will discuss how President Ferdinand E. Marcos emancipated the farmers, specifically the tenants, from the bondage of the soil to Presidential Decree number 27. And the last story is that of Mike's grandmother. This story simply shows that before the Family Code of the Philippines took effect on August 3, 1988, any male age 16 or upwards and any female age 14 or upwards, as long as there are no other legal impediments, of course, may contract marriage. This is also a depiction of legislative reforms. As clearly, the marriage of the grandparents who were both below 18 is valid at that time. But if this happens for whatever reasons that it was worked out, after the Family Code of the Philippines took effect, so as I've mentioned, that was in 1988, The marriage shall be considered null and void because of the couple, simply because they did not meet age requirement. This was a reform made under the administration of President Corazon C. Aquino. And for the birth, spacing, and legality of the use of contraceptives in the story, I'll be discussing the enactment of the Reproductive Health Law, or the RH Law. This law guarantees universal access to methods on contraception, fertility control, sexual education, and maternal care under the administration of President Benigno S. Aquino III. That was during the last administration. So you see, the stories are portrayals of activities or efforts undertaken by the government in various administrations. They reveal the continuous efforts and operations of the government. I have shown the prime movers and those who are affected, the Filipino people. But of course, public administration involves not just those in the government, it also involves various stakeholders, from individual citizens, civil society groups, to administrative personnel too. So, as I have mentioned, these are just snippets. We can tell more stories. I can tell you more stories. We can discuss more. So please comment below, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. This is your moderator, Melanie Briones.